joins us from Tampa, and political analyst Jihad Mouracadeh, who joins us from Beirut. Wayne Madsen, let me start with you. This latest incident, what do you think, a misfire or a calculated mistake, given that Kobani has not fallen, contrary to what U.S. officials have stated publicly time and again, that it would fall?
Well, I actually think that this is yet another incident where it's very, very obvious that the U.S. Is playing a double game in this war, so-called war against ISIL in Syria and Iraq. We've seen this type of thing happen in the past. We saw the U.S., for example, bombing the Syrian city of Raqqa 2 days after ISIL forces departed the city. We also know that the U.S. bombed a Syrian Air Force base where ISIL was not present. So it appears in those cases the targets may have been the Syrian government. Here we have a case where weapons falling in the hands of ISIL that are supposed to go to the Syrian Kurds. We know that Turkey is playing a very cynical game also, denying support to the Syrian Kurds. Recently they've said they're going to allow Iraqi Kurds to support them, but that's a very recent development. And now we have reports that Josh Earnest, the White House press secretary, was just asked today about a report that the U.S. is going to establish 3 military bases in Iraqi Kurdistan. He did not deny it, but he said he would refer the question to the Defense Department. I think that this is CIA Director John Brennan, who was schooled in Fordham in a Jesuit school, apparently has discovered the finest parts of Takfirism and Salafism. I think he is the person who has been largely responsible, with his friends in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Emirates, in creating ISIL.
Well, Jihad Mouracadeh, if you have a reaction to Wayne Madsen there.
Yes, I do. Let me say, first of all, I take the total opposite point of view, in that, first of all, the Islamic Army in Iraq was an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, as we all know that. And as an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, it was fought against by the United States together with the Sunni tribes between 2006 and 2008. And therefore, the area was pacified. It is unfortunate that because of Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki policies with the Sunni Arabs in Iraq, the Sunni Arabs became disenchanted with the policies, with the promises that Nouri al-Maliki made, and he never held his promises. Not only to the Sunni Arabs, but also to the Kurdish population as well, in terms of sharing the oil revenue, in terms of, and he also, with regards to the defense of Iraq, he took away all the Sunni officers from his military apparatus and from the security services and replaced them by people who were totally inept, but were from his side. So as a result, the person who is responsible for the ISIS, in my opinion, is Nouri al-Maliki himself. Now, let's not forget that the ISIS is not really ISIS. You have a bunch of militants, but it is essentially the ex-officers of Saddam Hussein, and from the town of Tikrit, the town of Saddam Hussein, and the military of Saddam Hussein. So basically, these are people who know how to fight a war, and they are the ones who are directing the war of ISIS.
Well, let me ask you then, what's the breakdown
Nothing to do with the United States.
What's the breakdown, do you think, of the ISIS as a whole?
What's the breakdown?
Yeah, in terms of, well, you say there's some ex-Saddam officials, or I should say military personnel, if that's my correct understanding.
I didn't say, it is not some. It is the local population, the local Sunni population, which constitutes an acceptable environment for these people to flourish, because these are people who are against the government of Nouri al-Maliki. So ISIS doesn't even have to fight. These people are already together with ISIS against the Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. But now the Arab Sunni tribes are back in the process. The Arab Sunni tribes support the current Prime Minister in Iraq. The Arab Sunni tribes and the current Prime Minister is planning on creating national guards in the various provinces under the command of the regional governors in all these provinces. So I think from this point of view, things are moving. But the people who are directing the military operation are not a bunch of terrorists, because they don't know how to run military operations. The people who are directing the military operations are Saddam's officers.
Well, Wayne Madsen, when it comes to these people that Jihad Mouracadeh is talking about, we know that a bunch of these weapons were U.S.-made weapons. The jail outbreaks, gathering of all these recruits, which was Al-Ghada at this point, you know, the offshoot, which became ISIL. Much of the military equipment is U.S.-made. If we want to take a look at how Rand Paul, this U.S. senator, has talked about ISIL and U.S.-made weapons, he said we gave 600 tons of weapons to the Syrian rebels in 2013 alone. Wondering why the ISIS grew strong during the time we gave them these weapons, the year 2013. And I'm looking at as ISIS as a whole when I'm talking about Syria and Iraq. So isn't then the deduction that U.S. weapons are being used to fight against the U.S. in one form or another?
Not only are U.S. weapons being used to support ISIL, but the weapons that were seized by Salafist rebels in Libya after the U.S. In a very terrible move orchestrated the overthrow of Muammar al-Gaddafi, these weapons were crated up and shipped to Syria. And these weapons were also wound up in the hands of what was to become ISIL. I think we have to also look at the fact that ISIL is made up of 12,000 mercenaries that have arrived first in Syria from 81 different countries. Even the original leadership, which was largely Maghrebian people, mostly Tunisian officers, were killed. They were beheaded by Chechens from the Republic of Georgia and Uyghurs from Western China because apparently Mr. Brennan of the CIA decided he wanted even more radical leadership in charge of ISIL, because after they get finished with Syria, Iraq, Iran, they have plans to march these terrorists into southern Russia and Western China. So there's much more at play with ISIL than a problem between Maliki and the Sunni population of Iraq. As a matter of fact, the recent reports are that the pro-Saddam Naqshbandi army, which was originally allied with these ISIL characters, has now gone over to fight with the Sunni tribes and is helping to fight against ISIL, especially in the area around Tikrit. So I think there's also, I want to say too that some of the mercenaries are from France and are Jewish women.
Well, Jihad Mouracadeh sounds like a Swiss Army knife. It has many uses, these ISIL, the way Wayne Madsen described there. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that the gentleman in Florida is confirming what I just said, that the Naqshbandi army and the Sunni tribes are now part and parcel of the Iraqi government, and therefore they are fighting with the Iraqi government and hopefully against ISIL in places like Tikrit and eventually Mosul. But from here to say that America created these people in order to expand into China and southern Russia, which is fine if you want to believe the hypothesis, but then can somebody explain to me why America is putting all its forces to fight those people that they created to go into China and southern Russia? It's something that doesn't make sense here. I'm sorry to say, but one has to be consistent.
Well, maybe that's a question we can ask Wayne Madsen. But first, let's take a look at some of the viewer comments as posted on our Facebook page.
Sure, these weapon drops were an accident, just like John McCain accidentally met with ISIS in Syria. ISIS is one big CIA mistake. If the U.S. can drop bombs on innocent civilians, why feel surprised when they drop ammunitions in the wrong place? They should have gone to Specsavers years ago. ISIL is a new machine made in the USA and compiled in Saudi Arabia. Their aim is to control energy resources, to defame Islam, to get over Iran and Syria, and to fool the world. Because the U.S. is either directly supporting them or paid others to supply weapons to them. The U.S. has given $1 billion to arm these people. They may have not been ISIL and or ISIS at the time, but both Congress and the current admin signed the deal. We were told the weapons were going to go to moderates, but there is only one problem. There are no moderates over there. The U.S. government created this mess, and I think they are still so intent on killing Assad and taking over the country, they are still arming them. Saudi and their Wahhabist doctrine are what the ISIS are fighting for.
Some of the viewer comments. Wayne Madsen, let's take a look at the arms manufacturers that are involved here, in particular from the U.S., obviously. And this goes without saying. It's common knowledge that for the past months we have seen their stocks actually rise quite a bit, at a minimum. Is the U.S. intent on having this region flooded with arms? There's arms flowing for the past years now into these terrorists inside Syria, not to mention the arms that are available inside Iraq. And I'm not saying U.S. is directly providing it. It could be doing it with its regional allies. And the end game being what? For all the different parties to get engaged with each other?
Well, this is all part of a plan that was hatched in the early 80s by a guy named Oded Yinon. He was an Israeli journalist. It's called the Yinon Plan, and it called for basically bringing about the destruction of Central Arab governments and replacing them with warring fiefdoms, as we see now in Syria and Iraq. And coupled with the Netanyahu, Richard Pearl clean break plan, which was hatched in the 90s, we see this playing out with the support of the Saudis and the Qataris. You know, the U.S. is the largest exporter of weapons, especially small arms, in the world. So, yeah, U.S. weapons manufacturers do well when there's this type of outbreak of violence anywhere in the world, especially now in the Middle East. I would also say the Toyota trucks, brand new Toyota trucks that ISIL used to go from Syria into Iraq were also supplied by the CIA. So one could ask Mr. Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister, how much money Japan made because of that very lucrative CIA contract on those trucks. I think a lot of money is being made here, but the end game here is to create a total destruction of the nation states of the Middle East.
I know what you're thinking, Jihad Mouracadeh, but underneath all this, you need weapons to fight. And they're all being flown into this region, aren't they? I mean, do you agree with that? And what is the end game with all these weapons flowing in from the different actors that are involved, manufactured in the U.S.? That is one major factor leading to the destruction of this region, isn't it?
Not at all, but I agree with you that, for one thing, all these conspiracy theories which are focused on the U.S. and the role of the U.S. and Israel and so on are very nice to listen to, but when you put them, when you face them with the reality on the ground, they all fall apart. The reality on the ground is not consistent with all these conspiracy theories. Just to go and say that the U.S. has flown C-130 airplanes just to drop weapons to ISIS so that they come and destroy them, so they're able to come and destroy them again, is totally inconsistent with any logic whatsoever.
Let me jump in because we're running out of time. I'd like to ask you this. I'd like to ask you this, Jihad Mouracadeh. I apologize for interrupting you, but I need to ask you this. It's not a conspiracy theory what the former U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Ryan Crocker, has said about these so-called Syrian rebels. He said, frankly, we don't have a clue who these supposed moderates are. Some saying that they call themselves Free Syrian Army, that they no longer even exist. So when you have the other senators saying that...
Yes, and Ryan Crocker is totally correct.
So what about all the arms that were provided to these people? So it's not out of the question falling into the hands of the ISIL, which then serves the purpose of the U.S. fight against Assad, doesn't it?
No, the arms provided to the so-called Syrian Liberation Army, okay, are very limited compared to what ISIS is getting. The arms that ISIS got, they got them because they took over the bases in Iraq where the Iraqi army was, and they had already U.S. military. It's not the U.S. which supplied these weapons. It is the Iraqi army, bases that were overrun by ISIS, and ISIS took over these weapons. Now, to go on and say that the C-130 has parachuted weapons to ISIS so that we can come and destroy these weapons is a stretch of the imagination. But the real point I wanted to make is as follows. If anybody can explain anything about what is happening in the East today, well, I take off my hat to him, because nobody, not even the Turks, not ISIS, not the Americans, not Iran, not Saudi, nobody is able to deal with this situation. Not even ISIS knows.
What about yourself?
We are all lost.
Why don't you try explaining it to us in about a minute? Why don't you try explaining it to us in a minute? Because that's all the time we have, so I can go to Wayne Madsen. Go ahead.
Who, me?
Yes.
Me?
Yes, you, Jihad Mouracadeh.
I just said I cannot explain anything anymore.
Okay, Wayne Madsen, can you? 1 minute.
Well, look, what we now have is people close to the neocon Stephen Harper up in Canada suggesting it was an ISIL attack on the Canadian Parliament today. I wouldn't put it past him, who's an arch neocon, to have found some guy in a mental institution, given him a weapon and given him access to the Canadian Parliament. That's what the fear factor is all about. ISIL represents the new boogeyman. It's Al-Qaeda 2. It's the sequel. If you like the first run of the movie, you're going to love the second run.
Thank you very much. Investigative journalist Wayne Madsen there from Tampa, and always a pleasure talking to Jihad Mouracadeh, political analyst who spoke to us from Beirut. Thanks for watching another edition of The Debate. From me, Takfiri, and the entire team in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.